The Agenda in the Summer with Nam Kiwanuka is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
After chasing big dreams with enormous effort for many years, how do you navigate what comes after? I'm Nam Kiwanuka. The Tokyo Olympics kick off this weekend, and tonight we return to a fascinating conversation from 2018 with athletes who competed at that highest level about how they handled the transition to post-competitive life. The 2020 Summer Olympics were set to take place in July of last year. As the pandemic deepened, countries began closing their borders and qualifying events had to be canceled. Despite the International Olympic Committee confirming that preparations for the Games would continue, in March 2020, Canada and Australia announced their athletes would not compete unless the Games were delayed. The next day, the IOC announced the Olympics would be postponed. It was the first time in the modern games that something other than war disrupted the event. Athletes were qualifying for Team Canada well into June of 2021. And needless to say, training and being ready for competition after the delay adds a whole other challenge for them. Here's a look back at how Canadian Olympians have faced a different kind of adversity.
Rolf, given that you're not an Olympian, I actually, funnily enough, do want to start with you.
Okay.
You're the non-Olympian on the panel, although you were on the national sailing team, I guess, for a bit.
Many moons ago.
You're an advisor at Game Plan. What is your mission there?
So Game Plan is a program designed to help our national team athletes, both Olympians and Paralympians, develop themselves in a more holistic way. And so the easier way to describe that is my job is to help our national team athletes figure out how to organize their lives around their sport. You know, a lot of times our amateur athletes, which is what our Olympians and Paralympians are, they're basically professional athletes without the paycheck. So they're training anywhere between 20 and 40 hours a week. They're away for 3 to 6 weeks at a time at training camps or competitions sporadically throughout the year. Doesn't leave a whole lot of time to develop a solid career path while they're still engaged with that. It leaves a lot of question marks in terms of, okay, how do we fit all these different pieces of their lives together in a way that actually makes sense? And so my role is to just try and provide some guidance and some advising to that and give them some support around those questions.
Deidra, at what point in your life did skiing become a thing?
Well, I skied from the time I was basically walking, but at 13 was kind of that moment where I transferred from alpine to freestyle skiing and knew that not only did I love this sport, but it was something that I wanted to go to the Olympics in. So it quickly escalated from there, meaning school from distance learning, leaving home at a young age, but it was all-consuming for a good portion of my life.
Did I hear that right? At 13, you knew you wanted to be an Olympic athlete?
Well, I had the pleasure of watching the 88 Games in Elizabeth in my backyard. I grew up in Red Deer, so that dream was there young, and in Red Deer we have a history of Olympic athletes, so it was more about finding the right sport. And when I found freestyle skiing, I knew that I'd always wanted to go to the Olympics, and that sport was the one that said, this is the one that I absolutely love.
Skating became part of your life at what age?
3.
3, no kidding.
And actually, ironically, the way I got into skating was I was tired of being the kid's sister throwing in a street hockey net and pucks shot at me. So my mission in life was not really to be a figure skater and to be a champion, but to be a better skater than my brothers. And that's how I progressed into the sport. I was on a mission to be better than my 3 older brothers.
And at what point, so 3 you get into it, at what point does it become all-consuming?
Well, at 7, I knew I wanted the pretty bling bling costumes. So at 7 I knew, and then by the time I was 10 I was competing, and that was when I started getting that real itch to want to go further and to take it to a new level. And I was quite young. I mean, by the time I was 14 I was traveling to Europe on the international team. So you're pretty young, and I think you all can agree with that when you get involved in a sport, it's, especially in our day, you tended to be a lot younger than some of the athletes we see today. You're on that mission and you're at that pretty young age.
You're almost a pro as a teenager.
Yeah, you really do. But you know, it's interesting enough for me, after I turned pro after the Olympics, my best skating came out when I was in my 30s. Which was really weird. Like, I thought, that was interesting, you know.
We'll follow up on that in a second. Craig, how about you? Skating for you started when?
Well, I was, so we moved to Kelowna, and I was, new kid in a small town. Everybody there was playing hockey, so I was just like, you know what, I better learn how to skate. So got on the ice, did a couple of lessons, did my first jump in hockey skates.
How old?
And I was 10.
Okay.
And at that time, it was just, everybody was kind of like, oh, wow, that's kind of cool. And they were crowding around watching me do these jumps in these skates. And I was like, this is it for me. I was hooked really in the first week.
Really? And at what point did you want the bling?
The bling. I've always wanted the bling. I still want the bling. So it was within a couple of weeks. My mom got her first bill, and she basically said, "Look, if you want to do something for fun, there are 100 sports we can do. But this, if you're very serious about doing this, I'll support you 100%." And I was 10 years old, and I remember sitting at the kitchen table. I said, "I'm going to the Olympics," and that was it. And I never turned back from that point on.
This is why you three are different from the rest of us. You know at a very young age that you need to be the best. That is amazing. Let's put some pictures up, shall we? Deidra, I want you just to take us through. Can we put Deidra's pictures up here, Sheldon? And these are some of, or maybe not, actually, you'll let us know whether these are some of the fonder moments of your career or not. What's that?
That's right after I landed a trick that I'd never landed in competition. It happened to be at the Salt Lake City Olympics, so kind of great timing for that trick to happen, and I was elated. I didn't know I was going to win a medal, but that was what it was to
look at that.
Perform the best
That
possible.
is ridiculous, Deidra. Look at that. You're upside down, for goodness sakes.
Yeah, that was my passion. So, yeah, this was quite the day, and I did win a medal at this performance. But I can honestly say that the best part of that day was looking up the hill. My coaches put two women on the podium in that event. And seeing their tears of joy, and then looking the other way and seeing mom and dad like sweating and chain smoking a cigar, just in relief of what had been the most stressful. It's not easy watching your child do triple twisting, double backflips, and to have that outcome and realize that they taught me to ski, they drove me to the ski hill. They were a huge part of that medal. And as a teenager, you don't really see that broader scope of what a medal means.
Amazing. Elizabeth, shall we look at a few pics from your life? Go ahead, Sheldon. Let's bring up some of these. Do you remember that moment?
You know what? I don't. I'm being very honest. I was quite sick in Calgary. I had the flu really bad. And I remember when I finished my program, and it's just like Deidra said, that when I came off the ice, it was the first time I'd ever seen my coaches crying. And I remember looking at them going, I did good. And it was a blur. The whole night was a blur. And I remember talking to my sports psychologist at the time, and I said, why can I not remember anything? And he said, you got into that ultimate zone that we work so hard to get athletes to at that moment. And he said, you found it, you did it, and you literally went from A to B, and you went mechanically right through the program like you've trained for all these years. And when you do that, you tend to forget what you just did because you've moved on to the next part.
Why does everybody bite the medal?
I was the first one. Did you know that?
No, I
was
didn't know
the
that.
very first one. My mother, when it all started after that, everybody started, my mom used to sit there and go, do they know you were the first one that did that? So, and it was a fluke. It was a reporter said, is it real silver? And I said, let me check. And it was a second. And I bit the medal, and then everybody bites their medals now. Yeah, so I'm proud to say I was I should have patented that.
Good for you. What were some of the fondest moments of your career?
So I kind of had two careers, right? I was at like a top world level with two different partners, and I think
my goodness. How the heck do you do that?
Now, I have no idea.
How do you hold a human
8 years ago, I probably could have broken it down
on one hand like that? That's unbelievable.
There's a lot of trust on her part, so I mean, one of the fondest moments was, so this is Valerie Marcoux. We were three-time Canadian champions at this point. We were one of the top-ranked teams in the world about 3 years prior to the games in Vancouver. And she actually retired. Her passion was no longer there, and we were 2.5 years before games in my hometown. And I said, I don't care what it takes, I'm not quitting. I got in a car, I drove about 3,000 kilometers around North America looking for a new partner. And within a year, I found who is actually the last picture that was up, Megan Duhamel. And we, within 1 year of coming really from nothing, putting in 12-hour days and working from the ground up again, we made it the top 6 in the world. And that was, it was sort of a big moment. It wasn't sort of a crowning achievement at a medal level, but when I look back at my whole career, those are sort of the things that I'm most proud of.
Fabulous. Why did you retire?
Well, I retired after a medical issue. So I was at a training camp about 5 months before the Vancouver Olympics, and I woke up in the morning it was a little bit scary, but I had a huge black eye and a fat lip and blood all over the floor and on my pillow. And knowing that I wasn't out the night before, I'd had a very normal training day. We spent a good amount of time in the Montreal hospital on the neuro ward, and it was determined that I'd had a grand mal seizure overnight. So it was a scary moment when sport kind of gets put into perspective and you look at your long-term health. And I looked at it as it was the first time it had happened in my life, and the only thing that they were able to find was a small, benign, almost birthmark on my brain that had probably been there since birth. And it was the moment that I looked at it and said, maybe this is my brain's way of saying the risks have been a lot over the years, and maybe it's time to move on and find a different path.
How bitter a pill was that for you to swallow? Because clearly you left the sport before you wanted to.
It was tough, but in some ways I think it was easier because there was no wavering. It wasn't that, do I go back? Could I be better? Is there something that I didn't achieve? It was time to move on. And then I had to take that path, and I had to commit to it 100% because I knew that there wasn't that opportunity where I could go back and continue to do flipping and twisting.
How old were you?
Oh boy. I think I was mid-20s, like 26.
26, and the thing that you basically have spent almost all of your life trying to be the best in the world at is over at 26.
Yep.
When most people are starting their careers.
Yep.
How do you cope with that?
Well, it was one of those things where first you're sad. So I moved actually to Kelowna, where I knew that I could do all the outdoor things that I wanted to do. So I biked and I hiked and I traveled, and I called it the Eat, Pray, and Love Deidra style year, where I just kind of did all these things to make my heart happy. And there were moments that weren't wonderful, but I had that year to spend some time figuring, okay, what do I love to do? And it took me that amount of time to realize, okay, it wasn't just my sport I loved, it was breaking down some of those attributes of my sport, the achievement, the goal setting, the small little details that actually made me feel happy in life weren't always related to the performance or the ups and downs of aerial skiing, and taking those things that I worked for in sport and that I loved in sport, and then trying to find ways that I could recreate them in my life. And what I learned was not all of those things are found in one thing. So it took me going broader and saying, okay, well, I love the feeling of exertion, so I might have to make sure that fitness is always part of my life. And I love achievement, so that might come academically, it might come different ways. So kind of breaking it down to outside of what I was getting from my sport into smaller pieces that were able to be recreated in life.
Gotcha. Craig, take us to the moment when you made the decision to retire.
So it was, there's a few reasons that athletes retire, and I was fortunate enough to be of the type of athlete that retired. It was planned. I was 29 years old. At that season, we had our greatest achievement, our worst failure. It was at the end of that year I was retiring. As pair skaters tend to retire in and around that age, and so for me I was ready, ready physically. But coming out of that, I had tried to set up, a plan for the rest of my life coming out of sport. I had started a small company at the time, and I was kind of just starting to get that off the ground. I kind of had some idea of where I wanted to go, but ultimately, even with knowing that I was going to retire that year, you spend your last 2 years training for the Olympics. So the number of new things that you're picking up in that last year or 2 years tends to be secondary. So I mean, I came out of sport, I really just lost, alone, not quite knowing what I was going to do next. Really, I mean, I'd been out of school for 12 years. It didn't feel right to go into sort of the corporate world. It didn't feel right to get a normal job or be in a normal social setting.
So how'd you figure all that out? How'd you figure out the path ahead?
Iteratively, I think it'd be the summary. I was fortunate enough that as I was kind of moving forward with this company, I realized I knew nothing about business, and I decided to try to sign up for a couple of night courses at McGill. Happened to meet somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody who had said, why don't you try applying for the MBA program at McGill? Again, I'd been out of school for 12 years, so I'm thinking, well, no. And they said, well, we do make some exceptions, so maybe try doing the GMAT and putting the application in. I did. I ended up getting in, and I found out only later that I was actually the first student that they'd ever made an exception for. And so this is, I say iteratively because it was a good solid, 4 or 5 years before I really kind of started feeling normal outside of sport.
So trial and error all the way.
Well, that's it. I mean, you're not. Sport isn't something you do. It's who you are. And I was Craig the skater. That was it. And so, learning to do normal things outside of sport and learning to be around people who are not athletes. This is all. I mean, it seems kind of stupid, but it really is. It's a big thing.
Take us to the moment when you decided you were no longer going to be that world-class athlete chasing the bling. And the next chapter of your life had to begin.
Well, it was interesting because when I won the medal in Calgary, I had a lot of mixed emotions. We had no money. My family was very poor. I was waiting for you to ask me why did you retire? And we were poor.
You had to make some money.
We literally just couldn't keep up with the expense of the sport. And back in the 80s, there wasn't a lot of sponsorships and that you see today for the athletes. And I remember getting the call asking me that I should take the medal and run and retire and move into a show career. And I remember feeling really hurt by that comment because the World Championships were going to be a month later after the Olympics. And there was a side of me that felt like I just did this, and you still feel that I'm not going to be able to do it again. And there was a lack of confidence in me. And I really kind of got angry, and I said, no, I'm going to Worlds, and I'm going to prove to everybody that Calgary wasn't a fluke, and I can do this again, and so forth. And luckily I did. Luckily I got the silver again. But it's like Craig said, as a figure skater, we were blessed to be in a sport that we have life after sport. And what I mean by that is we have a show career, we have a professional side of it. A lot of, sports that are skiing and things that they don't have a professional side to it. Hockey players do, figure skaters do. And I knew with the debt that we had incurred as a family to keep me in such an expensive sport and the amount of traveling and the costumes and the skates and everything that was a cost, I knew it was time that I had to get out there and try to get a job as a pro. And I was in a prime position to be able to do that. So that's what I did.
We have 3 stories here, Rolf, of different reasons why people retired and how they make the transition to the next career.
Absolutely.
Tell us about, you've got obviously a much broader experience dealing with many athletes in all of this. What are the biggest psychological hurdles they have to overcome when they hang it up?
It really runs the gamut. Psychologically, we've talked about it, there's that whole sense of identity. Who am I if not for sport? Not only that, but think about the social circle that you have all developed through your sport. And one of the things that I see very often is athletes who, their social circle is exclusively made up of people in sport. And so when they choose to retire, now you're removing all of that. All of their friends that they saw every day are no longer there. All of their mentors or people that they looked up to, whether they were coaches or technical directors, what have you, are no longer there. They don't know who to ask questions of. And that in and of itself can be extremely disorienting and kind of isolating, like Craig was talking about. Sometimes it's the most mundane practical issues that kind of catch athletes off guard. I was working with an athlete about a year ago, and she had admittedly done some great work in terms of planning her next step. She was going to school, but she came to me and said, I don't know how to eat like a normal human being.
What does that mean?
I mean, she's as a high performance athlete, she's used to eating 10,000 calories a day, and that's her normal. So, she would walk into the kitchen and say, I don't know how to make a meal that will not cause my body to go through some drastic changes because my training load has significantly decreased. And that was something that, not a lot of athletes anticipate, but is a significant thing. Another thing is, how do I go to the gym for fitness, like you were talking about, instead of to continue getting to that faster, stronger, better ideal that the Olympics or Paralympics obviously, tries to uphold. So it's those little things that kind of catch you off guard that you weren't even expecting that can be really disorienting. But certainly that's one of the areas that I try and provide some support and, connect the athletes into the network that we have within the Canadian Sport Institute, in terms of, my coworkers, the nutritionists, the strength coaches that I work alongside of, to help get them some of that detraining support alongside of some of the counseling support that I'm able to provide.
You had a big smile on your face when he mentioned the food and not remembering how to eat.
I was laughing because figure skating and freestyle skiing, we never consume 10,000 calories a day, unfortunately. So,
so this was a more aerobic athlete, obviously. But even, think about the gym sessions that you'd go to. You're spending 2-3 hours in the gym, sometimes twice a day. Yeah. That's not your average Good Life participant.
And learning to work out for fun.
Well, and one of the hardest things I find is at my age now and being that the best of the best in my sport, I go to a gym now and I want to see instant results like I did when I was a competitor. I was ripped. I had a 12-pack and, and now I go to the gym and I'm like, I've been in there a month and I'm like, where is everything, and that is a psychological thing because people look at you, you're supposed to be that athlete all the time.
Well, that image of you biting the medal is in our minds.
Exactly. And I have found it and when I was on the road and I was touring and I was doing shows and everything, I didn't have the time to put the 4 hours in the gym and all the stuff that I could do as an athlete. So it was harder for me eating out of Holiday Inns. It psychological, and I had, like you said, I had no one there with me. I didn't have my coaches, my parents, my support factor. I was sitting in a Holiday Inn in Butte, Montana crying because I didn't have anyone to talk to. I didn't have anyone to be there. And, prior to Olympics, I had gone through a depression and I had came out of that. But then I found 2 years after pro, the greatest time of my life, it should have been, I found myself right back in that place again. And it's scary.
At what point did you start to think of yourself as, okay, I'm now happily ensconced in the next phase of my life?
You're normal.
Yeah, I don't know. So for me, I'm going to say maybe 4 or 5-ish years after retiring, I started finding balance, which is probably the closest semblance I could say to what you just described. Because it was, the funniest thing was, I got out of sport and I was just like, you know what, set my next target, 20 years, let's go. And it was like I had a slingshot, just let go and off I ran. And I was putting in, 18, 19-hour days, 7 days a week. I was pulling an all-nighter at least once a week throughout school while building the company. It was just like, go, go, go. And I just burned out. I got to my last semester of school and I was done. The funny thing with sport is you can train like that. You can go crazy and focus and get what you need done. But within 6 hours, 4 or 5 hours a day, maybe, because you've got to take care of your body so that you can do it again the next day.
I want to find out from you, Rolf, when a high-performance athlete comes to you and says, that moment when I was on the podium, chewing my medal, was the greatest moment of my life, and I know it will be the greatest moment ever in my entire life, and I want to know how I find meaning in the rest of my life when I know there will never be a moment like that again.
Yeah, it's actually surprising how few point to that specific moment as the greatest moment in their lives. It is certainly up there, but there are so many things, just getting to the place where they were able to perform, I find for a lot of athletes is what they're most proud of. Putting themselves in the position to be able to do that. The fact that they got the payoff obviously is great. But I mean, what do I tell them when they say, how do I capture that again? A lot of it really just comes down to kind of what Deidra was talking about earlier, talking about, what is it that you value? What are those things that you enjoy, that you're passionate about?
But do you have to say to them at some point, look, your next life is going to be different. You're
Sure.
never going to have a moment like that again.
Well, I don't know that
you
it's
that
necessarily
blunt?
about saying, no, because who's to say, let's say Craig knocks his business out of the park. Who's to say that let's say he gets to the point, sells his business, he's the next Mark Cuban. Who's to say that moment won't be, won't overshadow his Olympic experience?
Well, let's find out. If you go public and you make a fortune,
well, I mean,
Will
first
it-
off, we are killing it. Mark Cuban's one of our investors. So yeah, we're doing very well. But I can tell you one thing. I mean, I came home the other day and I've got a little 2-year-old son who came running down the hallway, "Daddy!" And that might have been one of the greatest moments of my life, right? And so it does get better. There are amazing things that happen. It's certainly different, but yeah, it's. I mean,
and you don't worry about replicating the highs of your previous career.
I think initially we do.
You do initially.
I think we're searching for it. When you come off the competition journey and the success and everything that comes with competing in the hours, I think we're all guilty that we're searching and we make a lot of mistakes because we're looking for that high again. We're looking for that, don't forget who I am. We're so afraid people are going to forget us. Because we've been on the world scene, we've been in the limelight for so long, and there's that desperation. But I think it does get to a point where you realize it's okay. It's okay.
Don't you find though? I mean, in your case, no one's forgotten you. Anybody who was alive to have watched those Olympics in Calgary, they remember you. Of course they do.
It means a lot to hear that.
No, of course they do.
But you know what? I'm going to be really honest. If we're being very open here, every Olympics that happens on TV, I cry. I miss it. I cry. The Olympics just now in Korea, and I saw everybody there. I see Brian Orser, coach. I see all these friends, and as an athlete, you have that emotional, and it's funny because I have my family say to me, "How are you feeling right now?" And I feel old, like I miss it, and there's that little bit of a sadness.
Don't you think that they remember you, but they only know you for one moment, one shot in time,
And that's where you're grasping.
And it's a snapshot. It doesn't mean that you worked harder or that you did everything better than everyone else. And there's some components of that, but it's a day that it came together for you, and maybe it didn't come together for somebody else. Yeah, and it happens once every 4 years. And in a sport like mine, it lasts 3 seconds long. So to know that you stood on that podium is a proud moment. But I think most athletes would say they're proud of when they got up at 6 a.m. to do something they didn't want to do.
And that's it for tonight's agenda in the summer. Tomorrow, we continue recalling memorable conversations with a 2017 discussion about what roles in film and beyond exist for Black men and what it says about masculinity. I'm Nam Kiwanuka. Thanks for watching TVO and for joining us online at tvo.org. And we'll see you again tomorrow.
The Agenda in the Summer with Nam Kiwanuka is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
The Agenda in the Summer with Nam Kiwanuka is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.